when a stranger's mercy becomes a mother's last hope. The woman collapsed just beyond the gate, her body folding like cloth around the burning child in her arms. Evelyn Brooks had walked 3 days through merciless heat with no water, no food, and no place left to go because every door in 2 counties had already closed in her face. Her son's fever had turned his skin to fire. And she knew with terrible clarity that if someone didn't help them in the next few hours, she would bury him in this God-forsaken prairie with her bare hands. The ranch before her was her last chance. She didn't know the man who owned it. She didn't know if he'd turn her away like all the others. But as consciousness slipped away and dust filled her mouth, one thought pulsed through her mind: please. Just let him see us before we die. If you want to see how a desperate mother's plea changes 3 broken lives forever, stay with me until the end of this story. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The sun had no mercy that day. It beat down on the Wyoming plains with the kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer and bend, turning the grassland into something that looked more like water than earth. Evelyn Brooks had stopped noticing the beauty of it hours ago. Now she only felt the weight of her son in her arms, the weight of her own failing body, the weight of 3 days walking with nothing but fear to keep her moving. Her boots had worn through at the heels. Each step sent a jolt of pain up her legs, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not while Thomas still breathed. He was 6 years old, small for his age, with his father's dark hair and her own gray eyes. 3 days ago, he'd been laughing. 2 days ago, he'd been walking beside her. Yesterday, he'd begun to burn. Now he lay limp against her chest, his skin so hot she could feel it through both their layers of clothing. His breath came shallow and quick, and every few minutes a whimper escaped his cracked lips. She had no water left to give him, no shade to offer, no help coming. She had only herself, and herself was failing. The ranch appeared first as a dark line against the pale sky. A fence, maybe, or the edge of a building. Evelyn's heart lurched. She forced her legs to move faster, though her vision had started to blur at the edges. The line became a fence, then a gate, then buildings, a barn, a house, corrals that looked well-kept and sturdy. Someone lived here, someone with resources. "Please," she whispered, though no one was there to hear. "Please." She made it to the gate before her legs gave out. The fall was slow, inevitable. She twisted as she went down, cradling Thomas so he wouldn't hit the ground. Her shoulder struck first, then her hip, and the impact drove the air from her lungs in a soundless gasp. Dust rose around them. The earth was hard and sun-baked, still radiating the day's brutal heat. Thomas made a small sound of distress. Evelyn curled around him, her arms shaking with exhaustion, and pressed her lips to his forehead. He was burning, burning. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I'm so sorry, baby." She didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't see the shadow that fell across them. She only knew someone was there when a man's voice, low and rough with disuse, spoke from somewhere above her. "Ma'am?" Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, the world swam. She saw boots first, scuffed leather, dusty. Then legs. Then a man crouching down, his face backlit by the sun so she couldn't make out his features. All she could see was the silhouette, broad shoulders, a hat brim, strong hands reaching toward her. "Don't," she started, but her voice cracked. "Don't send us away, please. He needs help." The man went very still. Then he moved, quick and certain, sliding one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees. "I've got you. My son, I've got him too. Hold on to him." Evelyn tightened her arms around Thomas as the man lifted them both. The world tilted. She caught a glimpse of his face, weathered, bearded, maybe 40, before her vision grayed out entirely. She felt movement, heard the creak of a door, smelled something that might have been wood smoke or coffee. Then nothing. Chas. Caleb Hart had stopped expecting company years ago. The ranch was remote even by Wyoming standards, accessible only by a long dirt road that turned to mud in spring and dust in summer. Neighbors were few and far between. Visitors were rarer still. He liked it that way. Liked the silence. liked the predictability of cattle and horses and land that didn't ask questions or expect answers. So when he'd looked up from mending fence and seen the woman collapsed at his gate, his first instinct had been disbelief. His second had been to ignore it. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved with other people's problems led nowhere good. He'd learned that caring led to loss, that hope was a knife that eventually turned on you. 4 years ago, he'd buried those lessons along with his wife and the child she'd carried, and he'd promised himself he wouldn't forget them. But the woman hadn't moved, and there was a child. Caleb had stood there for a full minute, jaw tight, telling himself it wasn't his concern. Then he'd seen the boy's face, flushed dark with fever, mouth open, chest rising too fast, and his feet had moved before his mind could override them. Now they were in his house, the woman on his bed, unconscious, the boy beside her, burning up. Caleb stared at them, his hands clenched at his sides. He should have left them at the gate, should have ridden to town for the doctor and let someone else deal with this. But town was 8 miles away, and the boy didn't have 8 miles worth of time left in him. He forced himself to move. Water first. He filled a basin from the kitchen pump and carried it back to the bedroom, along with clean rags from the linen chest that hadn't been opened in years. The boy's skin was so hot it was almost shocking to touch. Caleb wet a rag and pressed it to the small forehead, then another to the back of the boy's neck. The child stirred, whimpering. "Easy," Caleb murmured. The word came out rusty. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken gently to anyone. "You're all right." He wasn't all right. The fever was dangerous. Caleb had seen enough sickness on the frontier to know that. But he kept changing the rags, wringing them out and replacing them, working with steady focus because it was the only thing he could do. The woman didn't wake. Caleb checked her pulse, fast but steady, and noted the worn-through boots, the dress that had once been fine, but was now stained and torn, the way her hands were blistered and raw. She'd walked a long way, carried the boy the whole time, from the look of it. He frowned. What kind of situation drove a woman to walk through open country with a sick child and no supplies? None of his business, he reminded himself. He'd get them stable, ride for the doctor, and send them on their way as soon as they could travel. That was all. Evelyn woke to the sound of water. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was dreaming, the soft splash and drip, the cool touch on her face. Then memory crashed back. Thomas. The fever. The ranch. She lurched upright, gasping. "Easy." The same rough voice from before. "He's here. Right beside you." Evelyn's vision cleared. She was in a bedroom, small, plainly furnished, clean. Thomas lay next to her on the bed, his face still flushed but not the terrifying scarlet it had been. A man sat in a chair by the window, a wet rag in his hands, the same man who'd carried them inside. She could see him clearly now. Tall, solid build, dark hair shot through with gray. His face was hard-lined, weathered by sun and wind, with a beard that looked more like neglect than intention. His eyes were blue, pale, sharp, assessing. "My son." Evelyn's voice came out hoarse. "Fever hasn't broken yet, but it's not climbing." The man's tone was flat, factual. "I've been cooling him down. He needs a doctor." "I know." Evelyn reached for Thomas, her hands shaking as she touched his face, his chest. He was so small, so fragile. "I know he does." "Town's 8 miles. I can ride for the doctor, but it'll be a few hours before—" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Evelyn looked up at the man, forcing herself to meet those cold blue eyes. "Don't leave us." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. "Ma'am, the boy needs medical attention. And I need to know we're not going to be thrown out the moment you're gone." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She was too tired for pride, too desperate for subtlety. "Please, I know you don't know us. I know we're strangers, but I'm begging you, let us stay until he's well. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just don't send us back out there." The man stared at her. His expression was unreadable. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Evelyn Brooks. This is Thomas." "Where's your husband?" "Dead." The word was blunt. "True." 6 months now." "Family?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "None that will help." The silence stretched. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the instinct to refuse. She'd seen it a dozen times in the past 3 days, in the faces of townspeople who'd turned her away, in the eyes of farmers who'd set their dogs on her when she'd approached their homes. She waited for it, braced for it, but the man just stood, tossing the rag into the basin. "Name's Caleb Hart. This is my ranch." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll ride for the doctor. There's bread and butter in the kitchen if you're hungry. Don't touch anything else." "Thank you." The words came out broken. "Thank you." He didn't acknowledge it, just left, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Evelyn closed her eyes and pulled Thomas close, pressing her face into his hair. For the first time in days, she let herself cry. Doc Brennan arrived 3 hours later, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Thomas thoroughly, asking questions Evelyn answered as best she could. When the fever started, what symptoms he'd shown, whether he'd eaten or drunk anything unusual. "Heat exhaustion," the doctor said finally. "Dehydration. Likely an infection from something he picked up on the road." He looked at Evelyn, his expression grave. "You got him here just in time, Mrs. Brooks. Another day, and—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Evelyn nodded numbly. "I'll leave medicine and instructions. Keep him cool, get fluids into him when he wakes. He should start improving in a day or two." Doc Brennan glanced toward the door, where Caleb stood watching. "You'll look after them, Hart?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Until the boy can travel." "Good." The doctor packed his bag, then paused. "You're doing a decent thing here." Caleb didn't respond. After the doctor left, the house fell into uneasy quiet. Evelyn stayed at Thomas's side, following the doctor's instructions with meticulous care. Caleb disappeared outside, returning only to bring food or check that they had what they needed. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't ask questions, but he didn't send them away. He met. Thomas's fever broke on the second night. Evelyn felt it happen. The subtle shift from burning to merely warm, the way his breathing eased and deepened. She pressed her hand to his forehead and nearly sobbed with relief. He was going to be all right. He was going to live. She found Caleb in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee. His fever broke. Caleb looked up. For just a moment, something that might have been relief crossed his face. Then it was gone. "Good." Evelyn sat down across from him, exhaustion making her bones ache. "I meant what I said. I'll work to pay you back. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever you need." "I don't need anything." "Then let me do it anyway." She leaned forward. "Please. I have nowhere else to go." Caleb studied her, his expression inscrutable. "What happened to you?" Evelyn hesitated. The whole story was long, complicated, humiliating, but he deserved some explanation. "My husband died in a logging accident, left debts I couldn't pay. His brother offered to help, said he'd take us in." Her voice hardened. "What he meant was he'd take Thomas and put me out. He wanted my son, not me. So I ran. And walked 3 days through open country. I didn't have a choice." Evelyn met his eyes. "Would you have done differently?" Caleb's expression flickered. He looked away. "No." The silence that followed was different than before, less hostile, more uncertain. "You can stay until the boy's stronger," Caleb said finally. "After that, we'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly. Caleb stood, dumping the rest of his coffee in the sink. "There's a spare room past the kitchen. Move your things there. The bed's bigger." He left before she could respond. The days that followed fell into a cautious rhythm. Thomas recovered slowly, his strength returning in small increments. He was a quiet child, watchful and serious in the way of children who'd learned too young that the world was not safe. But as the fever faded and his body healed, Evelyn caught glimpses of who he'd been before. Curious, gentle, quick to smile when he thought no one was watching. Caleb watched him too. Evelyn noticed it in small moments. The way Caleb's gaze followed Thomas when the boy explored the house, the subtle softening in his expression when Thomas laughed at something. He never approached the child directly, never spoke to him unless necessary, but he was aware of him, constantly. As for Evelyn, she threw herself into work. The house had the hollow feeling of a place that had been merely inhabited, not lived in. Dust layered every surface. The kitchen was functional, but joyless. The windows hadn't been properly cleaned in years. Evelyn started small, washing dishes, sweeping floors, airing out rooms, and worked her way deeper. She found a trunk of women's clothes in one of the bedrooms, folded carefully and smelling of lavender, a wedding ring on the washstand, a child's blanket, half finished, tucked in a drawer. She didn't ask, didn't need to. The house told the story well enough. Caleb didn't comment on her work, but she noticed he started eating the meals she cooked, stopped tracking mud through the clean floors, even brought in wildflowers one afternoon and left them on the kitchen table without a word. It was progress. Small, fragile, but real. 2 weeks after their arrival, Thomas spoke his first full sentence to Caleb. It happened at breakfast. Evelyn was at the stove, frying eggs. Caleb sat at the table reading a week-old newspaper. Thomas, allowed out of bed for the first time in days, sat across from him, kicking his legs and staring. "You have horses," Thomas said suddenly. Caleb looked up. "I do." "Can I see them?" Evelyn turned, ready to intervene, but Caleb was already folding the newspaper. "After breakfast. If your mother says it's all right." Thomas's face lit up. He looked at Evelyn with such hope that her chest ached. "Can I, Mama? Please?" She forced a smile. "If Mr. Hart says so." An hour later, Evelyn watched from the porch as Caleb led Thomas into the barn. The boy's hand was swallowed up in the man's larger one, his excitement evident in every step. Caleb moved slowly, adjusting his stride to match Thomas's shorter legs. Something twisted in Evelyn's chest. She recognized the shape of it, grief, gratitude, fear all tangled together. Thomas had lost his father. Caleb had lost a child. And here they were, circling each other like wounded animals, unsure whether to flee or trust. She didn't know what happened in the barn, but when they emerged 20 minutes later, Thomas was beaming and Caleb's expression had lost some of its hardness. "He's good with them," Caleb said as Thomas ran ahead toward the house. "Gentle, patient." His father kept horses. Evelyn's throat tightened. Thomas loved helping him. Caleb nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he just cleared his throat. "He can come back tomorrow if he wants." "He'd like that." Caleb headed back toward the barn, then paused. "Your husband, what was he like?" The question surprised her. Evelyn considered it. "Kind, hardworking. He loved Thomas more than anything." She paused. "He would have liked you, I think." Caleb's shoulders stiffened. He didn't respond, just walked away. But the next morning, he sought Thomas out himself. 3 weeks became 4. 4 became 5. Evelyn waited for Caleb to tell them to leave, but he never did. Instead, the house slowly came alive around them. Thomas's laughter filled rooms that had been silent. Evelyn's cooking brought warmth to the kitchen. Even Caleb seemed different, less ghost, more man. But Evelyn knew it couldn't last. She knew because she'd seen the letter that arrived from town, addressed to Caleb in unfamiliar handwriting. She knew because she'd watched his face close off as he read it. And she knew because the next morning at breakfast, he finally said what she'd been dreading. "There's been inquiries." Evelyn's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What kind of inquiries?" "Someone looking for a woman and a boy, matching your description." Caleb's voice was careful, neutral. "Name given was Marcus Brooks." The room tilted. Evelyn set down her fork before she dropped it. "Thomas's uncle." "The one you ran from?" "Yes." Her voice came out steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. They're asking around town, working their way out to the ranches." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They'll get here eventually." Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "Then we'll leave, today, before—" "Sit down." The command was quiet but absolute. Evelyn sat. Caleb leaned back, his eyes sharp. "Tell me why he wants the boy." "I told you he wants to take him—" "Why?" Caleb cut her off. "What does he gain?" Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. She hadn't told anyone this. Hadn't dared. But Caleb was watching her with an intensity that demanded truth, and she found herself speaking before she could think better of it. Thomas's father had a trust, set up by his father, meant for his heirs. When my husband died, it should have gone to Thomas. She swallowed hard. But Marcus is the executor, and Thomas is a child. If Marcus has custody, he controls the money until Thomas comes of age. 15 years of control over a substantial fortune. And you? I'm nothing. A poor widow with no legal standing. If I'd stayed, Marcus would have taken Thomas through the courts, and I couldn't have stopped him. Her voice cracked. So I ran. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then, if you had a husband, would that change things? Evelyn blinked. Yes. A husband would have legal rights to Thomas that Marcus couldn't override. But I don't... Marry me. The words fell into the room like stones. Evelyn stared at him. What? Marry me, Caleb repeated, his voice flat and businesslike. I need an heir for this ranch. You need a husband to protect your son. It's a practical solution. That's... Evelyn couldn't find words. That's insane. Is it? Caleb leaned forward. You said yourself a husband would give you legal standing. Marcus couldn't take Thomas if you were married to a property-owning man with means. And He paused, something painful crossing his face. I'm not having children of my own, but this ranch needs someone to inherit it. Your son could do that. You don't even know us. I know enough. His voice was hard. I know you'd walk through hell for your boy. I know he's a good kid, and I know Marcus Brooks will take him if you don't have legal protection. Evelyn's mind reeled. It was crazy, impossible. They were strangers, and yet... What would you expect, she asked carefully, from this marriage? A legal arrangement. You keep the house, raise the boy, I work the ranch. In time, we teach him to run it. Caleb's expression was unreadable. Nothing more. Nothing more, Evelyn repeated. She understood what he meant, what he wasn't offering. Her face heated. I'm not looking for a wife, Caleb said bluntly. I'm looking for a solution, same as you. It should have hurt. Maybe it did. But Evelyn found herself considering it anyway, because the alternative was losing Thomas, and that was unthinkable. If I said yes, she said slowly, we'd need to do it quickly, before Marcus gets here. We could ride to town tomorrow, be married by noon, and if he challenges it in court, then we fight him in court. Caleb's jaw set. But he'll have a harder time claiming fraud if we're legally wed before he ever shows up. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were shaking. This was madness. Marrying a stranger, tying her life to a man she barely knew, asking him to fight a battle that wasn't his. But Thomas was upstairs, safe and healing in a house that had become the first real home he'd had in months. And Marcus was coming. She raised her eyes to Caleb's. All right. His expression didn't change. All right? Yes. Evelyn's voice steadied. I'll marry you. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Relief, maybe, or resignation. He nodded once. We leave at dawn. Then he stood and walked out, leaving Evelyn alone with the weight of what she'd just agreed to and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to save them all. The ride to town began in silence. Evelyn sat beside Caleb on the wagon bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the prairie roll past in shades of gold and green. Thomas sat between them, still weak but excited by the prospect of an adventure. He didn't know what they were going to town for. Evelyn had only told him they had business to attend to, and she was grateful for his innocence. Caleb drove with steady competence, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He'd been up before dawn, hitching the horses and loading supplies with the efficiency of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. When Evelyn had come downstairs with Thomas, Caleb had simply nodded toward the wagon and said, Ready? No discussion. No second thoughts. Just forward motion. It should have terrified her. Maybe it did. But terror had become so familiar in recent months that it hardly registered anymore. What she felt instead was a strange, hollow calm, the kind that came from making an irreversible decision and having no choice but to see it through. Mama? Thomas tugged at her sleeve. Why are we going to town? Evelyn forced a smile. Mr. Hart and I have some papers to sign. What kind of papers? Grown-up business, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. Thomas accepted this with the easy trust of a child who'd learned his mother would protect him. He turned his attention back to the landscape, pointing out a hawk circling overhead. Evelyn's chest tightened. She was doing this for him, to keep him safe, to make sure Marcus could never take him. She had to believe it was the right choice. Caleb spoke for the first time an hour into the journey. There's a preacher in town. He'll do it quietly if we ask. How much will he charge? Nothing I can't cover. Caleb glanced at her briefly. You'll need a ring. Evelyn looked down at her bare left hand. She'd sold her wedding ring months ago to buy food. You need one if this is going to look legitimate. His tone was matter of fact. We'll get one from the general store. Caleb, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling you how this works. He kept his eyes on the road. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. Evelyn swallowed her protest. He was right. If they were going to convince a judge that this marriage was real, they needed to make it look real. A wife without a ring would raise questions. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb didn't respond. The town appeared as a cluster of buildings shimmering in the late morning heat. It was bigger than Evelyn expected. A main street lined with shops and businesses, side streets branching off into residential areas, the spire of a church rising above it all. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their ordinary lives, unaware that the woman in the dusty wagon was about to tie herself to a stranger to save her child. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a modest building with a sign that read General Goods. He climbed down and came around to help Evelyn, his hands brief and impersonal on her waist. Thomas jumped down on his own, energized by the novelty of being in town. Stay close, Evelyn told him. Don't wander. Inside, the store smelled of leather and tobacco and something sweet Evelyn couldn't identify. The shopkeeper, a plump woman with graying hair, looked up from her ledger and smiled. Morning, Hart. What brings you to town? Need to see your rings, Caleb said without preamble. The woman's eyebrows rose. Her gaze shifted to Evelyn, taking in her worn dress and tired face, then to Thomas. Understanding dawned in her eyes, along with something that might have been pity or curiosity or both. Of course. She moved to a glass case and pulled out a tray of simple bands, silver, gold, brass. Nothing fancy. These are what we have. Caleb examined them with the same focus he gave everything. He picked up a plain gold band, narrow and unadorned, and turned to Evelyn. Give me your hand. Evelyn extended her left hand. It trembled slightly. Caleb's fingers were calloused and warm as he slipped the ring onto her fourth finger. It fit perfectly, settling into place as if it had always belonged there. This one, Caleb said. The shopkeeper nodded, naming a price that made Evelyn wince, but Caleb counted out the money without hesitation and pocketed the ring again. We'll need it in an hour. Getting married today, are you? The woman's tone was carefully neutral. That's right. Congratulations. The word sounded automatic. The preacher's at the church most mornings. Just head up Main Street. They left the store with Thomas chattering about all the interesting things he'd seen. Evelyn walked beside Caleb in continued silence, acutely aware of the weight of what was about to happen. In less than an hour, she would be married to this man. She would take his name, bind her life to his, place her son's future in his hands. She barely knew him. The church was small and white-painted, with a neat yard and a bell tower that looked like it had seen better days. Caleb tied the horses and helped Thomas down, then turned to Evelyn. You're sure about this? It was the first time he'd asked, the first acknowledgement that this was still a choice, that she could still walk away. Evelyn thought of Marcus, his cold smile, his threats, the way he'd looked at Thomas like a commodity to be acquired. She thought of the weeks she'd spent here at the ranch, watching her son heal and laugh and feel safe for the first time since his father died. I'm sure, she said. Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Let's go. The preacher was a thin man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. He looked surprised to see Caleb Hart standing in his church. Evelyn got the sense that Caleb wasn't a regular attendee, but he recovered quickly. Mr. Hart, what can I do for you? We need to be married, Caleb said. Today. Now, if possible. The preacher's eyes widened. He looked from Caleb to Evelyn to Thomas. I see. And this is Evelyn Brooks. She's been staying at my ranch. Caleb's voice was steady, giving nothing away. We've decided to marry. The boy is hers. He'll be taking my name. I see, the preacher repeated. He seemed to be searching for the right words. Marriage is a sacred covenant, Mr. Hart. It shouldn't be entered into lightly. I'm aware of that. Are you both here of your own free will? No coercion? No— Yes, Evelyn said firmly. I'm here by choice. The preacher studied her face, perhaps looking for signs of distress or doubt. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he sighed and pulled out a leather-bound book. Very well. I'll need witnesses. Can't you find some? Caleb asked. I'll see what I can do. The preacher disappeared into a back room and returned a few minutes later with two women, his wife and her sister, apparently, who looked curious but willing. This will do. Shall we begin? They stood before the simple altar, Evelyn and Caleb side by side with Thomas pressed against Evelyn's skirts. The preacher opened his book and began reading words Evelyn had heard once before, 7 years ago, when she'd married Thomas's father in a church full of flowers and hope. This was nothing like that. This was stark and practical and almost businesslike. The preacher's voice droned through the familiar passages. Caleb's responses came in a low, steady tone, and when it was Evelyn's turn to speak, she heard her own voice as if from a great distance, promising things she wasn't sure she could give to a man she wasn't sure she understood. Do you have a ring? The preacher asked. Caleb produced the gold band. He took Evelyn's hand. His grip was firm but not painful, and slid the ring onto her finger for the second time that day. This time it stayed. I now pronounce you man and wife. The preacher closed his book. You may kiss the bride. Caleb hesitated. Evelyn saw the conflict in his eyes. This wasn't part of the practical arrangement they'd discussed, but the witnesses were watching, and a marriage without a kiss might raise questions. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers briefly, chastely, a kiss that conveyed nothing but obligation. Then he stepped back. Thank you, preacher, Caleb said. He paid the man, shook his hand, and turned toward the door. We should go. And just like that, Evelyn was married. They walked back to the wagon in silence. Thomas skipped ahead, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just occurred. Evelyn touched the ring on her finger, still not quite believing it was real. Mrs. Hart, Caleb said quietly as he helped her onto the wagon seat. The name sounded foreign, wrong, but also, strangely, like a kind of armor. Mr. Hart, she replied. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Then it was gone, and they were riding out of town, the marriage certificate folded in Caleb's pocket and Evelyn's old life receding with every mile. They were halfway home when Thomas finally asked the question Evelyn had been dreading. Mama, why did you marry Mr. Hart? Evelyn glanced at Caleb. He kept his eyes on the road, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. This was her question to answer. Because I care about you, sweetheart, she said carefully, and Mr. Hart is a good man who's willing to help us. We're going to live at the ranch now. It's going to be our home. Is Mr. Hart my papa now? Evelyn's throat tightened. No, baby. Your papa will always be your papa, but Mr. Hart is your stepfather now. He's going to take care of us. Thomas considered this. Do I call him Pa? Caleb spoke before Evelyn could. You call me whatever feels right to you, son. The word son hung in the air. Thomas looked up at Caleb with wide eyes, then smiled tentatively. Okay. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Less tense, more settled, as if something had been established, boundaries drawn and accepted. When they reached the ranch, Caleb unhitched the horses while Evelyn took Thomas inside. The house looked the same as when they'd left it. Clean floors, fresh curtains, the smell of this morning's bread still lingering, but it felt different now. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was home. Her home. Their home. The thought was terrifying and comforting in equal measure. Evelyn started dinner while Thomas played quietly in the next room. She was peeling potatoes when Caleb came in, dust on his clothes and weariness in his eyes. "Everything all right with the horses?" she asked. "Fine." He washed his hands at the pump. "We need to talk about what comes next." Evelyn set down the potato. "Marcus. Marcus." Caleb dried his hands and turned to face her. "He's going to come here. Could be tomorrow, could be next week. But he'll come. And when he does, we tell him you're married, show him the certificate, make it clear Thomas is my son now, legally." Caleb's jaw set. "If he tries to challenge it, we get a lawyer. That will cost money." "I have money." His tone was firm. "This is what we agreed to, Evelyn. I'm not backing out because it gets expensive or difficult." Evelyn studied his face. She'd expected practicality from this marriage, not whatever this was. Protection, commitment, something that looked almost like partnership. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Really?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I had a son once, or would have. He didn't make it." He looked away. "I couldn't save him. Maybe I can save yours." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Evelyn wanted to say something, offer comfort, express gratitude, but she sensed that words would only cheapen it. Instead, she just nodded. "Thank you." Caleb cleared his throat and moved toward the door. "I'll be in the barn if you need me." He left before she could respond. Evelyn returned to her potatoes, but her hands were shaking. She'd married this man thinking she understood the arrangement. Practical, transactional, mutually beneficial. But there was more to Caleb Hart than she'd realized. More pain. More capacity for care than he wanted to admit. It should have made her feel safer. Instead, it made her afraid of what would happen when Marcus came and put everything to the test. Marcus Brooks arrived 4 days later. Evelyn heard the horse first, the sharp sound of hooves on the hard-packed road. She was hanging laundry, and the sound made her freeze, a damp sheet clutched in her hands. She knew, with terrible certainty, who it was before she even saw him. Caleb emerged from the barn, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He'd been expecting this too. The rider came into view, a man in his 30s, well-dressed in city clothes that looked absurd on the prairie. Dark hair, cold eyes, a smile that didn't reach them. Marcus had always looked like a man calculating angles, figuring out how to turn situations to his advantage. He pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted with the ease of someone who'd grown up around horses, but hadn't ridden one in years. His gaze swept over the ranch, dismissive and assessing, before landing on Evelyn. "Hello, Evelyn." His voice was smooth, pleasant. "You've been hard to find." Evelyn set down the laundry basket. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Marcus. I've been worried sick. My brother's widow disappeared with his son. You can imagine the concern." He glanced at Caleb, taking in the rifle, the hard expression. "And who might you be?" "Caleb Hart. This is my ranch." "Ah." Marcus's smile widened. "The good Samaritan who took in my desperate sister-in-law. How generous of you." "She's not your sister-in-law anymore," Caleb said flatly. "She's my wife." The smile froze. "Excuse me?" "We were married 4 days ago. Evelyn Hart. Legal and binding." Marcus's expression went through several rapid changes. Shock, anger, calculation. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its pleasant veneer. "That's convenient. A destitute widow shows up on your doorstep and suddenly you're married. Tell me, how much did she offer you to go along with this charade?" "It's not a charade," Evelyn said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "We're legally married. Thomas is Caleb's son now. Thomas is my nephew, my brother's heir, and you—" Marcus pointed at her, his face reddening. "You have no right to give him away to some stranger." "I have every right. I'm his mother. A mother with no means, no home, no ability to provide for the boy." Marcus's voice turned sharp. "I offered you a place. I offered to take care of you both. And you ran like a thief in the night." "You offered to take Thomas and put me out on the street," Evelyn shot back. "Don't pretend this is about concern, Marcus. This is about the trust fund." Something dangerous flashed in Marcus's eyes. "Careful, Evelyn. It's the truth. You want Thomas because you want control of his inheritance. That's all this has ever been about. What I want is to honor my brother's wishes. He would have wanted his son raised properly, not on some backwater ranch by a man with no education, no refinement. That's enough. Caleb's voice cut through Marcus's tirade like a knife. He stepped forward, the rifle still in his hand. You're on my property. You've said your piece. Now you can leave. Marcus's jaw clenched. This isn't over. I'll challenge this sham marriage in court. I'll prove she coerced you or bribed you or good luck with that. Caleb's expression was stone. The marriage is legal. We have witnesses. And Thomas is thriving here. Any judge who sees him will know he's well cared for. We'll see what a judge says about a woman who runs away with a child and marries the first man she finds. Marcus swung back onto his horse. You haven't won, Evelyn. Not by a long shot. He wheeled the horse around and rode off, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart hammering. That had gone exactly as badly as she'd feared. Marcus wasn't giving up. He was going to fight this in court. And he had money and connections and lawyers. What did she have? Evelyn? She turned to find Caleb watching her, his expression unreadable. He's going to challenge us, she said. Her voice shook. He's going to drag us into court and try to prove this marriage is fake. Let him try. Caleb, he has resources we don't. He has money. We have truth. Caleb set the rifle aside. You're my wife. Thomas is my son. That's not a lie, legally speaking. And if Marcus wants to argue otherwise, he'll have to prove fraud. That won't be easy. He'll try. He'll dig into our past, question people in town, look for any evidence that this was arranged. Then we make sure there's no evidence to find. Caleb's voice was firm. From now on, we act like a real married couple. No separate bedrooms, no distance. Anyone who sees us needs to believe this marriage is genuine. Evelyn stared at him. You mean? I mean, we share a room. We act like husband and wife in public. We give them nothing to question. He paused. I'm not talking about... I said I wouldn't ask that of you, and I won't. But appearances matter. If Marcus is watching, we can't give him ammunition. Heat flooded Evelyn's face. The idea of sharing a room with Caleb, even platonically, felt intensely intimate. But he was right. If they were going to convince a judge this marriage was real, they needed to convince everyone else first. All right, she said quietly. We'll make it look real. Not just look. It is real. You're my wife. Thomas is my son. That's the truth we're going to live, starting now. Something in his tone made Evelyn's chest tighten. This was still a practical arrangement. She knew that. But the way Caleb said it, with such finality and conviction, made it feel like more. Like maybe, against all odds, they actually were becoming a family. That evening, Evelyn moved her belongings into Caleb's room. It was the largest bedroom in the house, with a wide bed, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Evelyn had cleaned it weeks ago, but had never been inside for more than a few minutes. Now it was hers, too. Caleb had already cleared space in the wardrobe for her things. He'd also brought in a chair and a blanket, which he set by the window. I'll sleep there, he said, gesturing to the chair. You take the bed. Caleb, you can't sleep in a chair. I've slept in worse places. I'll be fine. Evelyn wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw told her it wouldn't do any good. Thank you. He nodded and left her to settle in. That night, Evelyn lay in the wide bed, acutely aware of Caleb's presence across the room. She could hear his breathing, slow and even, and the occasional shift of the chair. It should have been awkward, uncomfortable. Instead, it felt strangely safe. For the first time in months, Evelyn fell asleep without fear gnawing at her chest. The next morning, Caleb rode into town to see a lawyer. He returned several hours later looking grim but determined. Evelyn met him at the door, her stomach in knots. Well? Marcus filed papers. He's challenging the marriage and seeking custody of Thomas. Caleb hung his hat and moved into the kitchen. The hearing is set for 2 weeks from now. Evelyn's legs went weak. She sank into a chair. What did the lawyer say? He said Marcus has a case. A widow marrying a stranger weeks after arriving at his ranch raises questions. But Caleb sat down across from her. He also said if we can show the marriage is genuine, if we can demonstrate that Thomas is happy and well cared for, we have a chance. Just a chance. That's all we ever had, Evelyn. His voice was steady. But it's more than you had before you came here. He was right. Before, she'd had nothing. No husband, no home, no legal standing. Now she had all three. It might not be enough, but it was something. What do we do? She asked. We prepare. We get character witnesses, people who can testify that Thomas is thriving here. We document everything, and we present ourselves in court as a legitimate family. Caleb leaned forward. The lawyer said the judge will likely want to speak with Thomas. Evelyn's heart clenched. He's 6 years old. I know, but the judge will want to hear from him, see if he's happy, if he feels safe. Marcus will twist anything Thomas says. Thomas is a smart boy. He'll tell the truth. Caleb's gaze held hers. Do you trust him to do that? Evelyn thought of her son, his quiet strength, his gentle nature, his love for this ranch and the life they'd built here. Yes, I trust him. Then that's what we'll do. We'll prepare, we'll fight, and we'll win. The confidence in his voice steadied her. Evelyn took a deep breath. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Caleb brought in neighbors to meet Evelyn and Thomas, building relationships that could be called upon for testimony. Evelyn worked harder than ever to make the house a home, cooking elaborate meals, keeping everything spotless, creating the image of a thriving household. And Thomas, sensing the tension even if he didn't understand it fully, stayed close and tried to be helpful. But at night, alone in the room they shared, the fear crept back in. What if it's not enough? Evelyn whispered one evening. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and Caleb was in his chair by the window, mending a bridle. What if the judge doesn't believe us? Caleb set down the leather. Then we appeal. And if that doesn't work, we figure out another way. There might not be another way. There's always another way. He stood and crossed to the bed, sitting down beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight. Listen to me. I made you a promise when we married. I told you I'd protect Thomas. That wasn't conditional. That wasn't dependent on a judge's ruling. Whatever happens in that courtroom, I'm not giving him up. Do you understand? Evelyn looked up at him. In the lamplight, his face was all hard angles and shadows, but his eyes were fierce with conviction. I understand, she said softly. Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer, then stood and returned to his chair. Evelyn lay down, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. Inside, Caleb's presence was a steady anchor. She didn't know what would happen in 2 weeks. Didn't know if a judge would see what she saw. A family, imperfect but real, built on necessity but growing into something more. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Caleb Hart kept his promises. And that, for now, would have to be enough. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. Evelyn woke before dawn, her stomach twisted in knots so tight she could barely breathe. She'd barely slept, listening to the wind rattling the shutters and playing out every possible disaster in her mind. Beside her, the bed was empty. Caleb had risen even earlier. She could hear him moving around downstairs. She dressed carefully in the best dress she owned, a dark blue cotton that Caleb had bought her in town the week before. He'd insisted she needed something proper for court, something that made her look like a respectable rancher's wife rather than a desperate widow. Her hand shook as she fastened the buttons. When she came downstairs, Caleb was at the kitchen table with Thomas. The boy was eating breakfast, his face serious but not frightened. Caleb had spent hours with him over the past 2 weeks, explaining gently what would happen today, preparing him without scaring him. Morning, Caleb said. His voice was steady, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders. Morning. She couldn't eat, but she poured herself coffee and sat down. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Thomas shrugged. Okay, I guess. Mr. Hart, Pa, he said I just have to tell the truth. The casual use of Pa made Evelyn's throat tighten. It had started about a week ago, Thomas trying out the word tentatively, and Caleb had accepted it without comment. Now it came naturally, as if it had always been that way. That's right, Evelyn managed. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask. They finished breakfast in near silence, then climbed into the wagon. The ride to town felt both endless and far too short. Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Caleb drove with his usual steady focus, but she noticed the way his jaw was set, the tightness around his eyes. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we face it together." Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. The courthouse was a squat brick building on the edge of town. Several horses and wagons were already tied outside. Word had spread about the hearing, and people were curious. Evelyn recognized some faces from town, neighbors from surrounding ranches, and standing near the entrance with a smug expression was Marcus Brooks, flanked by a well-dressed man who could only be his lawyer. Marcus's eyes locked on Evelyn as they approached. His smile was cold. "Hello, sister-in-law. Ready for today?" Caleb stepped between them. "We're not doing this here." "Of course not. We'll save it for the judge." Marcus's gaze shifted to Thomas, and his expression softened into something that might have looked like affection to someone who didn't know better. "Hello, Thomas. How are you, son?" Thomas pressed closer to Evelyn's side. "I'm fine." "Good. That's good." Marcus crouched down, bringing himself to Thomas's eye level. "I've missed you. Your Uncle Marcus has been very worried." "I'm okay," Thomas repeated, his voice small. "We should go inside," Caleb said firmly. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, guiding him toward the courthouse door. Marcus straightened, his false warmth evaporating. "This is far from over, Hart." "I know." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Evelyn had imagined. Just a single room with wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, and windows that let in harsh morning light. Their lawyer, a middle-aged man named Samuel Garrett, was already there. He greeted them with a nod. "The judge is fair," he said quietly, "but he's also a stickler for propriety. He won't like the speed of your marriage, but if we can show it's genuine, we have a chance." "How do we show that?" Evelyn asked. "By being honest, by letting him see that Thomas is happy and well cared for, and by not giving Marcus any ammunition." Garrett glanced at Caleb. "The opposing counsel will try to rattle you. Don't let him." Caleb's expression didn't change. "I won't." They took their seats. Evelyn sat between Caleb and Thomas, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. The room filled slowly, curious townspeople, a few ranchers who'd agreed to testify on their behalf, Marcus and his lawyer on the opposite side. The air felt thick with anticipation and judgment. Then the judge entered. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent time on the frontier before taking the bench. His robes hung heavily on his frame, and his eyes were sharp as he surveyed the courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff called. Everyone stood. The judge settled into his chair and gestured for them to sit. "This is a custody hearing," he began, his voice carrying easily through the small space. "Marcus Brooks is petitioning for custody of Thomas Brooks, currently in the care of his mother, Evelyn Hart, and her husband, Caleb Hart. We're here to determine what's in the best interest of the child." His gaze swept the room. "I expect honesty, decorum, and respect for this court. Understood?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "Mr. Sterling," the judge addressed Marcus's lawyer, "you may present your case." Sterling stood, buttoning his jacket. He was polished, confident, every inch the city lawyer. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is quite straightforward. My client, Marcus Brooks, is seeking custody of his nephew, Thomas Brooks, who was left in the care of his mother after his father's tragic death 6 months ago." He paused, letting that sink in. Mrs. Hart, previously Mrs. Brooks, is by all accounts a loving mother, but she is also a woman with no means, no property, and no ability to provide for her son. After her husband's death, Mr. Marcus Brooks, acting out of familial duty, offered to take both Mrs. Brooks and Thomas into his home. She refused. Instead, she fled with the child and, within weeks of arriving at a stranger's ranch, married that stranger in what can only be described as a marriage of convenience. Sterling turned to face Evelyn and Caleb. "We're not here to question Mrs. Hart's love for her son. We're here to question her judgment. A marriage entered into hastily, with no courtship, no foundation. This is not the stable home a child deserves. My client can provide that stability. He has means, he has a proper home, and he has the legal right as Thomas's closest male relative." Evelyn's nails dug into her palms. Everything Sterling said was designed to make her look desperate, irresponsible, unfit. And the worst part was that some of it was true. She had married Caleb quickly. She had fled Marcus's offer. She had acted out of desperation. Sterling continued, "We will demonstrate that this marriage is a sham designed solely to prevent my client from exercising his rightful claim. We will show that Mrs. Hart has acted against her son's best interests, and we will ask this court to grant custody to Marcus Brooks, who can provide the stable, proper upbringing young Thomas deserves." He sat down, looking satisfied. The judge turned to Garrett. "Mr. Garrett?" Their lawyer stood, his movements calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, the opposing counsel would have you believe this is a simple case of a loving uncle seeking to care for his orphan nephew, but the truth is considerably more complicated." Garrett moved to the center of the room. "Thomas Brooks is not orphaned. He has a mother who has sacrificed everything to keep him safe. Mrs. Hart didn't flee Marcus Brooks's generosity. She fled his manipulation. You see, Thomas's father left a substantial trust fund, administered by Marcus Brooks. If Marcus gains custody of Thomas, he controls that money for the next 12 years. This isn't about family, Your Honor. It's about money." Marcus's face darkened, but he said nothing. "As for the marriage," Garrett continued, "yes, it happened quickly. But speed doesn't equal fraud. Mrs. Hart and Mr. Hart married legally, with witnesses, with full knowledge of what they were undertaking. And in the weeks since, they've built a home together. Thomas is thriving on that ranch. He's healthy, happy, and safe. That's what matters. Not the timeline, not the circumstances, but the reality of a child who has found stability after months of upheaval." Garrett looked directly at the judge. "We ask that you see this family for what it is. Imperfect, perhaps, but real. And we ask that you leave Thomas where he belongs, with his mother." He sat down. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back. "I'll hear testimony. Mr. Sterling, call your first witness." Sterling stood. "I call Marcus Brooks to the stand." Marcus moved to the witness box with practiced ease, taking the oath and settling into the chair. He looked every inch the concerned uncle, well-dressed, earnest, composed. Sterling led him through the basics. Marcus's relationship with his brother, his offer to help Evelyn after the funeral, his shock when she disappeared. "Can you describe your offer to Mrs. Brooks?" Sterling asked. "Of course. I told her she and Thomas were welcome in my home. I would provide for them both, give Thomas the education and opportunities his father would have wanted." Marcus's voice was smooth, reasonable. "I was stunned when she refused. More stunned when she ran. Did you have any indication why she might run?" "I believe she was overwhelmed by grief, not thinking clearly. I never imagined she'd end up marrying a stranger within weeks." "And what do you believe is in Thomas's best interest?" Marcus looked directly at the judge. "A stable home, proper schooling, the kind of life his father worked hard to provide for him. I can give him that. Mr. Hart, however well-intentioned, is a rancher with no education, no refinement. Thomas deserves better." Evelyn's hands clenched. The implication was clear. Caleb wasn't good enough. The ranch wasn't good enough. Their life wasn't good enough. Garrett stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Brooks, you mentioned a trust fund. Can you explain its terms?" Marcus's expression flickered. "It's a standard trust set up by my father for his grandchildren." "And who administers it?" "I do, as executor of my brother's estate." "So if you gain custody of Thomas, you control his inheritance until he turns 18? The money would be used for his care and education, yes." "And how much money are we talking about?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't see how that's relevant." "I'll decide what's relevant," the judge said. "Answer the question." "Approximately $200,000. A ripple went through the courtroom. It was a fortune, more than most people in that room would see in their entire lives. Garrett pressed on. "And you're currently in debt, are you not?" "That's a gross oversimplification." "Yes or no, Mr. Brooks?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I have some outstanding loans, yes. Business investments." "Failed business investments. You're facing bankruptcy, aren't you?" "My finances are not on trial here." "But your motives are." Garrett's voice was sharp. "You want Thomas because you want his money. That's the truth, isn't it? That's absurd. I want what's best for my nephew. You want $200,000 and 12 years to use it however you see fit. Objection, Sterling called. Speculation. Sustained, the judge said, but the seed was planted. Garrett returned to his seat. Marcus left the stand looking less composed than when he'd arrived. Sterling called a few more witnesses, people from Marcus's town who testified to his good character, his stable home, his resources. But Garrett's questions had done damage, and everyone in the room knew it. Then it was their turn. Garrett called Caleb to the stand. Evelyn watched her husband walk to the witness box, his movements steady despite the dozens of eyes on him. He took the oath and sat, his expression calm but watchful. Garrett started gently. Mr. Hart, how did you meet Mrs. Hart? She collapsed at my gate. She and the boy. They'd been walking for days, and the boy was sick with fever. Caleb's voice was matter of fact. I brought them inside. And you cared for them? Called the doctor. Made sure they had what they needed. Why? Caleb frowned. Because they needed help. But you're a solitary man, from what I understand. You don't often take in strangers. No. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. But I wasn't going to leave a sick child at my gate. Oh, when did you decide to marry Mrs. Hart? When she told me about Marcus, about what he was trying to do, Caleb's voice hardened slightly. She needed a husband to protect her son. I needed an heir for my ranch. It was a practical arrangement, Garrett nodded. And has it remained practical? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Evelyn held her breath. It started that way, he said finally. But it's become more. Thomas is a good boy. Evelyn is a good woman. They've made my house a home again. I don't regret marrying her. Do you love her? The question hung in the air. Evelyn's heart pounded. Caleb's eyes found hers across the courtroom. I respect her. I care about her and the boy. Love, he paused. That's a complicated word. But I'm committed to this family. That's not in question. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was honest, and somehow that made it more powerful. Sterling stood for cross-examination, his expression predatory. Mr. Hart, you said this marriage was a practical arrangement, so you married for convenience, not affection? I married for a lot of reasons. But affection wasn't one of them initially? No. And you're asking this court to believe that in a matter of weeks, you've developed genuine care for a woman and child you barely knew? Caleb's voice didn't rise. I'm asking the court to see that it doesn't matter how it started. What matters is what we've built. Thomas is safe with us. He's happy. He's loved. That's what counts. But if money wasn't an issue, if Mrs. Brooks had means of her own, would you have married her? Probably not. But that's not the situation we were in. Sterling smiled. So you admit this marriage wouldn't exist without the threat of Mr. Marcus Brooks seeking custody? I admit the circumstances brought us together. What we've made of it since then is what matters. No further questions. Garrett called Evelyn next. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The bailiff's voice seemed to come from far away as she took the oath. Then she was sitting, facing the room, facing the judge. Garrett's questions were straightforward. Why had she fled Marcus? Why had she married Caleb? What was her life like now? Evelyn answered as honestly as she could. She explained Marcus's threats, his control over the trust, her fear that he would take Thomas. She described the ranch, the stability it offered, the way Thomas had blossomed there. Do you love your husband? Garrett asked. Evelyn's throat tightened. It was the same question he'd asked Caleb, but somehow it felt more dangerous. I respect him deeply. I'm grateful to him, and I care for him more every day. Is this marriage real? Yes. Evelyn's voice strengthened. It may have started as a solution to a problem, but it's become a family. That's real. Sterling's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her judgment in running, her decision to marry so quickly, her ability to provide for Thomas on her own. He implied she was using Caleb, manipulating him, prioritizing her own comfort over Thomas's true needs. Isn't it true, Mrs. Hart, that you had no options left? That Mr. Hart was your last resort? Yes, Evelyn admitted. I had no options. But that doesn't make this marriage false. It makes it necessary, and necessity has turned into something real. Or so you claim. But how can we trust that? How can this court believe that a marriage born of desperation is anything more than a legal maneuver? Because you can ask my son. Evelyn's voice shook but held firm. Ask him if he's happy. Ask him if he feels safe. Ask him if this is home, so he'll tell you the truth. Sterling smiled coldly. We intend to. The judge called a recess before Thomas's testimony. Evelyn returned to her seat, her hands trembling. Caleb reached over and took her hand, squeezing it once. You did well, he said quietly. Evelyn wasn't sure she believed him, but his hand was warm and steady, and she held on. After the recess, the judge called Thomas to the stand. Evelyn's heart broke watching her small son walk to the witness box. He looked so young, so vulnerable. The bailiff had to adjust the Bible for Thomas to reach it for the oath. Then he was sitting in the chair, his feet dangling above the floor, his eyes wide. The judge leaned forward, his expression gentling. Hello, Thomas. Hello, sir. You understand why you're here? Yes, sir. You're deciding where I should live. That's right, and I need to ask you some questions to help me decide. Is that all right? Thomas nodded. I need you to speak out loud, son. Yes, sir. That's all right. The judge smiled slightly. Good. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to tell me the truth. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Do you know what the truth means? It means not lying. It means saying what really happened. Very good. The judge settled back. Tell me about where you live now. Thomas's face brightened. On the ranch? With Mama and Pa? There's horses and cattle and a big barn, and my room has a window where I can see the sunrise. Do you like it there? Yes, sir. A lot. What do you do during the day? I help Pa with the horses. I'm learning how to brush them and clean their hooves, and I help Mama in the garden, and sometimes Pa teaches me to read better. Does your Pa, Mr. Hart, is he kind to you? Thomas nodded vigorously. He's real kind. He's teaching me about the ranch, and he says one day I'll help run it, and he listens when I talk. He doesn't get mad. And your mother? Mama takes care of me. She makes sure I eat and sleep and do my chores, and she reads to me at night. Thomas's voice softened. She's not scared anymore. She used to be scared a lot, but not now. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. The judge made a note. Do you remember your Uncle Marcus? Thomas's expression changed, not fearful exactly, but guarded. Yes, sir. Do you like him? Thomas hesitated. He's okay. Just okay? He used to visit sometimes, but he didn't play with me or anything. He mostly talked to grown-ups. Did he ever offer to have you come live with him? I heard him tell Mama that once, but Mama said no, and then we left. Were you sad to leave? No, sir. Uncle Marcus's house was fancy, but it didn't feel like home. The ranch feels like home. Sterling stood. Objection, Your Honor. The child is too young to understand the implications. The child is old enough to know where he feels safe, the judge said sharply. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Sterling sat, his face tight. The judge turned back to Thomas. If you could choose, Thomas, where would you want to live? Thomas didn't hesitate. With Mama and Pa. On the ranch. Why? Because they want me. Not because they have to or because of money or anything. They just want me. Thomas's voice was clear and certain. Pa says I'm his son now. And Mama says we're a family, and that's what I want too. The courtroom was utterly silent. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Thomas. You can step down. Thomas climbed out of the chair and walked back to Evelyn. She pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his hair. The judge looked at both lawyers. Final arguments? Sterling stood, but his argument felt hollow now. He talked about stability and resources and proper upbringing, but Thomas's words hung in the air, undeniable and true. Garrett's closing was brief. Your Honor, you've heard from a boy who knows exactly what he wants and why. You've heard testimony showing that Marcus Brooks's motives are financial, not familial. And you've seen a family, unconventional perhaps, but real. The law exists to protect children. In this case, that means leaving Thomas Hart exactly where he is. The judge was silent for a long time, his fingers steepled under his chin. Finally, he spoke. This is not an easy case. Marriage of convenience is not uncommon on the frontier. People marry for land, for labor, for survival. The question is whether those marriages serve the best interests of any children involved. Evelyn's heart hammered. Mr. Brooks, the judge said, I don't doubt you care for your nephew, but I also cannot ignore the financial incentive you have in gaining custody. The debt you carry, the trust you control, these create a conflict of interest that troubles me. Marcus's face went pale. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, the judge continued, your marriage may have begun as a practical arrangement, but I've watched you both today. I've listened to your son, and I believe that what started as necessity has become genuine. Thomas is clearly thriving in your care. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Therefore, I'm ruling that custody of Thomas Hart remains with his mother and stepfather. This marriage is legally binding and will be recognized as such. Mr. Marcus Brooks, your petition is denied. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't process it. Then the words sank in. Custody remains, petition denied, and her legs went weak. Caleb's arm came around her waist, holding her steady. We won, she whispered. We won, he confirmed. Marcus was on his feet, his face red. This is outrageous. That marriage is a fraud. This hearing is concluded, the judge said firmly. Mr. Brooks, I suggest you accept this ruling and move on. Any further harassment of the Hart family will be dealt with severely. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm. After a moment, Marcus turned and stalked out of the courtroom, his lawyer hurrying after him. Evelyn turned to Caleb, tears streaming down her face. We really won. We did. He looked down at Thomas. You did well, son, real well. Thomas beamed. They left the courthouse together, stepping out into bright afternoon sunlight. People crowded around, offering congratulations, shaking Caleb's hand. But Evelyn barely heard them. All she could think was that Thomas was safe. He was hers. They were a family. For the first time in 6 months, the future didn't terrify her. It looked like home. The ride home felt different. The same road, the same wagon, the same prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. But everything had changed. Thomas sat between them, chattering about the horses he'd seen in town, already forgetting the tension of the courtroom. Evelyn listened to his voice with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Caleb drove in his usual silence, but there was something different in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands held the reins, less tension, less weight. Thank you, Evelyn said quietly, her words almost lost beneath the creak of the wagon and Thomas's running commentary. Caleb glanced at her. For what? For keeping your promise. For fighting for us. He looked back at the road. I told you I would. I know, but saying it and doing it are different things. Evelyn's throat tightened. You stood up there and claimed us as yours in front of everyone. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. His voice was firm. The moment we married, you became mine to protect, both of you. That's not something I take lightly. The word mine sent a strange flutter through Evelyn's chest. She told herself it was just relief, just gratitude. But sitting beside him in the fading afternoon light, watching the way the sun caught the silver in his hair, she wondered if it might be something more. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned deep purple, stars beginning to pierce through. Thomas was drooping against Evelyn's side, exhausted by the day's events. Caleb carried him inside and up to his room while Evelyn lit the lamps. When Caleb came back down, he found her standing in the kitchen, staring at nothing. You all right? He asked. Evelyn turned to him. I keep thinking he's going to come back. Marcus, I keep thinking this isn't really over. It's over. The judge made that clear. But what if he appeals? What if he finds some other way? Evelyn. Caleb crossed to her, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Marcus Brooks just lost in court. His motives were exposed, his debts made public. He's not going to risk further humiliation, and even if he tried, we'd fight him again, and we'd win again. You sound so certain. I am certain. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. You're my wife. Thomas is my son. Anyone who wants to challenge that will have to go through me first." Evelyn looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger than hers, scarred from years of ranch work, strong and steady. She thought about the fact that this man had been a stranger 2 months ago. Now he stood between her and the world, willing to fight battles that weren't even his to begin with. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to thank me. We're family now." He squeezed her hand once, then let go, stepping back. "Get some rest. It's been a long day." He left before she could respond, heading out to check on the livestock like he did every night. Evelyn stood in the quiet kitchen, her hand still tingling from his touch, and realized with startling clarity that something had shifted between them today. The marriage might have started as a practical arrangement, but it wasn't that anymore. She wasn't sure what it was becoming, but it felt real in a way that made her both hopeful and terrified. The days that followed the hearing settled into a new rhythm, one that felt less like survival and more like living. Thomas threw himself into ranch life with the enthusiasm of a boy who finally felt secure enough to put down roots. He was up with Caleb every morning, following him to the barn, learning to saddle horses and mend fences and read the sky for weather. Evelyn watched them together with a complicated mix of emotions. Thomas had loved his father deeply, and she'd worried that accepting Caleb as Pa might somehow diminish that memory. But Thomas seemed to understand instinctively that having a stepfather didn't erase his real father. It just meant he had someone else who cared about him. And Caleb did care. It showed in small ways. The patient explanations when Thomas made mistakes, the quiet pride when the boy succeeded at something new, the way Caleb had started keeping hard candies in his pocket because Thomas liked them. "He's good with him," their neighbor Sarah Brennan said one afternoon. She'd come to borrow some flour and stayed for coffee, watching through the kitchen window as Caleb taught Thomas to throw a rope. "You can see he means it. That boy's lucky to have him." "We're both lucky," Evelyn admitted. Sarah gave her a knowing look. "And how are things between you two? You and Caleb?" Evelyn busied herself pouring more coffee. "Fine. Good." "That's it? Just fine?" "What else would it be?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe something more." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "I saw how he looked at you in that courtroom, Evelyn. That wasn't the look of a man in a marriage of convenience." Evelyn's face heated. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" Sarah leaned back, unconvinced. "The man stood up in front of the whole town and claimed you as his, fought for your boy like he was his own blood. And you're telling me that's just convenience?" "It's complicated. Marriage usually is." Sarah's expression softened. "But you could do worse than a man like Caleb Hart. He's had his share of pain, that one. Lost his wife and baby years back. Closed himself off after that. Seeing him open up again, even a little, that's something." Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd known Caleb had lost his family, but hearing it stated so plainly made it more real. "How did it happen?" "Childbirth. The baby came early, something went wrong. He lost them both in one night." Sarah shook her head. "He blamed himself, though anyone with sense could see it wasn't his fault, just one of those tragedies that happen sometimes. But Caleb, he shut down after that. Stopped going to town except when necessary. Stopped talking to people. We all thought he'd die alone on that ranch. Until we showed up." "Until you showed up," Sarah agreed, "and gave him a reason to live again." The words sat heavy in Evelyn's mind long after Sarah left. She thought about them that evening as she cooked dinner, as she sat at the table with Caleb and Thomas, as she cleaned up afterward while Caleb read to Thomas from a book about horses. Had she given him a reason to live? Or had she just given him another responsibility, another burden to carry? That night, lying in the bed while Caleb sat in his chair by the window, Evelyn finally gathered the courage to speak. "Sarah told me about your wife today. And the baby." Caleb went very still. For a long moment he said nothing, and Evelyn wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he sighed. "Everyone knows. Small town, long memories. I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it hurt less." Caleb was quiet again, then, "No, it doesn't." Evelyn sat up, drawing her knees to her chest. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, I mean." Taking on someone else's child when you'd already lost your own? No. The answer was immediate, certain. If anything, it's... He paused, searching for words. Thomas reminds me that I can still do right by a child, that I'm not cursed or broken or whatever I thought I was after I lost them. You're not broken. Felt like I was for a long time. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark prairie. After Elizabeth died, I told myself I'd never go through that again. Never care that much, never risk that much pain. Easier to be alone. And now? Now I've got a wife and a son and a reason to get up in the morning besides feeding cattle. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Turns out alone isn't easier, it's just lonelier. Evelyn's heart squeezed. She wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but she wasn't sure if it would be welcome. Their marriage existed in such a strange space, legally binding, emotionally complicated, physically distant. Caleb, she said softly, you don't have to sleep in that chair anymore. He turned to face her fully. Evelyn, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but the chair can't be comfortable, and the bed is big enough for both of us. We're married. We can share a bed without... She felt her face heat, without it meaning more than sleep. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded slowly. All right. That night they lay on opposite sides of the bed, a careful distance between them. Evelyn was acutely aware of his presence, the sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his side of the bed, the dip of the mattress under his weight. But there was also something comforting about it, something that made the darkness feel less vast. She fell asleep easier than she had in weeks. The change was gradual but unmistakable. Sharing a bed led to accidental touches in sleep, a hand brushing an arm, a foot bumping a leg. Those touches led to a growing ease with proximity. Caleb started sitting closer at meals. Evelyn found herself touching his shoulder when she spoke to him. Small gestures that meant nothing individually but together suggested something shifting. Thomas noticed. Are you and Pa sweet on each other now? He asked one morning while helping Evelyn gather eggs. Evelyn nearly dropped the basket. What makes you ask that? You smile at him a lot. And he smiles back. And last night at dinner you were holding hands under the table. Had they been? Evelyn tried to remember. They must have been, because Thomas was rarely wrong about such things. We care about each other, she said carefully. Is that all right with you? Thomas shrugged. I guess so. I like it when everyone's happy. Are you happy, sweetheart? Yeah, Thomas grinned. I like it here. I like Pa teaching me stuff. And I like that you don't look scared anymore. Evelyn pulled him into a hug. I'm not scared anymore. We're safe now. And they were. The court's ruling had been final. Marcus hadn't been heard from since, and life had settled into something that felt almost normal, almost like the family they were pretending to be. Except Evelyn wasn't sure they were pretending anymore. The realization hit her one evening in early autumn. She was at the stove making stew when Caleb came in from the barn, Thomas riding on his shoulders. The boy was laughing, holding onto Caleb's hair for balance, and Caleb was grinning in a way she rarely saw. Found this one trying to climb into the loft, Caleb said, swinging Thomas down. Told him he needs to be bigger first. I'm getting bigger, Thomas protested. I grew a whole inch since we got here. That you did, Caleb ruffled his hair. Go wash up for dinner. Thomas ran off, and Caleb moved to the wash basin. Evelyn watched him, this man who'd been a stranger and was now so thoroughly woven into her daily life, she couldn't imagine it without him. He'd given them safety, yes, stability, but somewhere along the way, he'd also given them something more precious, himself. What? Caleb asked, catching her staring. Nothing, just thinking. About? Evelyn hesitated, then, about how different things are now. How different you are. Caleb dried his hand slowly. Different how? Lighter, less haunted. She moved closer. Happy, maybe. He considered this. Maybe I am. Because of the ranch? The help with work? Because of you. The words were quiet but steady. Both of you. This house was dead before you came. Now it's alive again. Evelyn's breath caught. Before she could respond, Thomas came thundering back down the stairs, breaking the moment. But as they sat down to dinner, Caleb's words echoed in her mind. Because of you. That night, lying in the darkness with Caleb beside her, Evelyn finally acknowledged what she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. She was falling in love with her husband. It should have been impossible. You couldn't fall in love with someone in just a few months, especially not when the marriage started as a transaction. But the heart didn't care about logic or timelines. It just felt what it felt. And what Evelyn felt, lying there in the dark, was a deep and growing affection for the man who'd saved her son, who'd fought for their family, who'd opened his wounded heart enough to let them in. She didn't know if Caleb felt the same way. His actions suggested care, commitment, maybe even affection. But love? That was a different question entirely. She was still wrestling with it when Caleb's voice came through the darkness. Evelyn? You awake? Yes. A pause. Then, I've been thinking about what I said earlier, about you making this house alive again. I remember. I meant it, but I don't want you to think... He stopped, frustrated. I'm not good with words. You're doing fine. Caleb shifted, and Evelyn felt the mattress move. When I married you, it was for practical reasons. I told myself it would stay that way. Simple, clean, no complications. Evelyn's heart began to pound. And now? Now nothing about this feels simple. His voice was rough. You're in my head all the time. I catch myself watching for you, listening for your voice. When you smile at me, it feels like... He stopped again. Like what? Evelyn whispered. Like maybe I'm not as dead inside as I thought I was. Evelyn turned toward him in the darkness. She couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of his profile against the window. Caleb, I need to tell you something. All right. This marriage, what we have, it's not just practical for me anymore either. I care about you, more than I expected to, more than I probably should. Silence. Long enough that Evelyn's stomach began to twist with anxiety. Had she said too much? Pushed too far? Then Caleb moved, closing the distance between them. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers threading through hers. I care about you too, he said quietly. I'm not sure what that means yet, but I wanted you to know. Evelyn squeezed his hand. That's enough. For now, that's enough. They lay like that, hands clasped, until sleep claimed them both. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Evelyn was kneading bread when she heard horses approaching. Her first instinct was fear. Marcus, come back to cause more trouble. But when she looked out the window, she saw an older woman in traveling clothes being helped down from a wagon by a man who was clearly her driver. Caleb emerged from the barn, his expression wary. Can I help you? The woman straightened her hat and approached with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. I'm looking for Caleb Hart. You found him. And Evelyn Hart? Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. I'm Evelyn. The woman's eyes swept over her, assessing. Then, surprisingly, her stern expression softened slightly. I'm Catherine Brooks, Marcus's mother. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Caleb stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. If you're here to cause trouble, he began. I'm not. Catherine held up a hand. May I come inside? I've traveled a long way, and what I have to say deserves to be said sitting down. Caleb and Evelyn exchanged glances. Finally, Evelyn nodded. Come in. They settled around the kitchen table, tension thick in the air. Catherine accepted coffee but didn't drink it, just wrapped her hands around the cup. I heard about the court hearing, she began. My son told me his version, of course, full of indignation and accusations. But I know my son, Mrs. Hart. I know when he's lying. Evelyn said nothing, waiting. So I made some inquiries of my own, spoke to people in town, to the judge's clerk, to anyone who'd witnessed what happened in that courtroom. Catherine's voice was steady but pained. And I learned the truth about why you ran, about the trust fund, the debts, my son's real motivations. He's your son, Evelyn said carefully. Why are you telling us this? Because he's my son, but he's also wrong. Catherine met her eyes. Marcus has always been ambitious, always wanted more than he had. I'd hoped marriage and responsibility would settle him, but instead it seems to have made him desperate. When he told me he wanted custody of Thomas, I thought it was genuine concern for his nephew. I didn't realize, her voice cracked, I didn't realize he saw that child as a financial asset. Caleb leaned forward. What exactly are you here for, Mrs. Brooks? To apologize first, for my son's behavior, for the pain he's caused you. Catherine pulled a folded document from her bag. And second, to give you this. Evelyn took the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a legal document, dense with formal language, but the key phrase jumped out at her. Relinquishment of all claims to guardianship or custody of Thomas Brooks. I don't understand, Evelyn said. I'm the matriarch of the Brooks family. I have significant influence over my son, financial and otherwise. I've made it very clear to Marcus that if he continues this vendetta, he'll lose my support entirely, which means he'll lose access to the family money that's currently keeping his creditors at bay. Catherine's expression was firm. He's agreed to sign this document, relinquishing any claim to Thomas, in exchange for my continued financial assistance with his debts. Evelyn's hands shook. Why would you do this? Because I may have raised a fool, but I'm not one myself. Catherine's voice softened. I saw Thomas in that courtroom, Mrs. Hart. I sat in the back where no one noticed me, and I watched my grandson testify. That boy is happy. He's safe. He's loved. What more could any grandmother want? Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. You're giving him up. I'm setting him free. There's a difference. Catherine stood. I won't intrude on your lives. But if you're ever in need, if there's anything my grandson requires, you can contact me. Not as an adversary, as family. She placed a card on the table with her address, then moved toward the door. Caleb stood to see her out. Mrs. Brooks, he said. Thank you. Catherine nodded. Take care of them, Mr. Hart. Both of them. I will. After she left, Evelyn sat staring at the document in her hands. It was over. Truly, completely over. Marcus couldn't come back, couldn't threaten them, couldn't take Thomas. They were safe. Evelyn? Caleb's hand settled on her shoulder. You all right? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and laughed. It came out shaky but genuine. I'm better than all right. We're free, Caleb. Really free. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms. It was the first time he'd held her like this, not out of necessity or for show, but simply because they both needed it. Evelyn pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. We're going to be okay, she whispered. Yeah, Caleb said, his voice rough. We are. When Thomas came in from the barn a few minutes later, he found them still standing there, wrapped around each other in the middle of the kitchen. He grinned. You are sweet on each other. Caleb laughed, a real, full laugh that Evelyn had never heard before. Maybe we are, son. Maybe we are. And for the first time since this whole journey began, Evelyn believed it might actually be true. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Evelyn and Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to the darkness. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of the day settling into something like peace. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, she said quietly, that Marcus will still be out there, that we'll still be fighting. Caleb reached over and took her hand, pulling it into his lap. His thumb traced slow circles on her palm. It's real. Catherine Brooks made sure of that. Marcus can't touch us now. I still can't believe she did that. Chose us over her own son. She chose what was right over what was easy. Takes courage to do that. Caleb's voice was thoughtful. Reminds me that people can surprise you, even when you think you've got them figured out. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, thinking about how much had changed in just a few short months. You've surprised me. Have I? Every day. She turned to face him. When I first saw you at that gate, I thought you were going to turn us away. You looked so hard, so closed off. I never imagined you'd become this. This? Someone I can't imagine living without. The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. I was closed off, he admitted. Spent 4 years building walls, telling myself it was safer that way. Then you showed up half dead at my gate with a dying boy in your arms, and every wall I'd built started cracking. He shook his head, tried to fight it. Told myself it was just duty, just an arrangement. But somewhere along the way, duty turned into something else. What did it turn into? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Love. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with my wife. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd hoped, suspected, even believed it might be possible. But hearing him say it made her heart feel too large for her chest. Caleb, you don't have to say it back, he said quickly. I know this started as something practical. I know you might not feel, I love you too. The words came out fierce and certain. I've been falling in love with you for weeks. Maybe since the day you stood up in that courtroom and claimed us as yours. Maybe before that. I don't know when it started, but I know it's real. Caleb stood abruptly, pulling her up with him. His hands framed her face, and in the starlight she could see the raw emotion in his eyes. Can I kiss you? He asked. Really kiss you? Yes. He kissed her like a man who'd been holding back for too long, like a man who'd finally given himself permission to feel. Evelyn melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, and kissed him back with everything she'd been too afraid to show before. It was nothing like the perfunctory kiss they'd shared at their wedding. This was heat and hope and the promise of something real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I want this to be a real marriage, he said, not just on paper. I want you as my wife in every way, if you'll have me. I'll have you, Evelyn whispered. I already do. They stood there under the stars, holding each other, and Evelyn felt something settle deep in her bones. This was home, not just the ranch, not just the house, but this man and the life they were building together. This was where she belonged. Inside, they climbed the stairs together, hand in hand. When they reached their bedroom, Caleb paused at the door. Are you sure? He asked one more time. Evelyn answered by pulling him inside and closing the door. That night they became husband and wife in truth, not just in name. And when Evelyn fell asleep in Caleb's arms, she did so knowing that she was finally, completely safe. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd found a partner who stood beside her, who fought with her, who loved her not despite her desperation, but because of the strength it had revealed. The seasons turned and life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like thriving. Thomas grew taller, his shoulders broadening with the work he did alongside Caleb. He still talked about his father sometimes, keeping those memories alive, but he called Caleb Pa without hesitation and looked at him with uncomplicated love. Evelyn watched them together one crisp October morning, Caleb teaching Thomas how to repair a fence post while the boy peppered him with questions. The patience in Caleb's voice, the pride when Thomas got something right, the easy affection between them. It was everything she'd hoped for, and more. You're staring again, Sarah Brennan said, appearing at Evelyn's elbow with the basket of preserves. That husband of yours knows you watch him like that? Evelyn laughed, not even embarrassed anymore. Probably. I'm not exactly subtle about it. No, you're not. But then again, neither is he. Sarah nodded toward where Caleb had looked up, caught Evelyn watching, and smiled before returning his attention to Thomas. That man's head over heels for you. Anyone with eyes can see it. I'm head over heels for him too. Good. You both deserve it. Sarah set down her basket. I brought you some plum jam, and I wanted to tell you before you hear it from someone else. Marcus Brooks left town. Evelyn's stomach tightened automatically, an old fear rising before she could stop it. Left? Moved back east, from what I heard. His mother cut him off financially, unless he gave up the custody fight, and without her money, he couldn't maintain his lifestyle here. Last anyone saw, he was packing up his things looking bitter as old coffee. Sarah's expression was satisfied. Good riddance, if you ask me. Good riddance, Evelyn agreed softly. After Sarah left, Evelyn stood on the porch letting the news sink in. Marcus was gone. Not just defeated, but actually gone from their lives entirely. The relief was enormous, but it was also tinged with something unexpected: pity. Marcus had destroyed himself chasing money and control, and now he had neither. She thought about Catherine Brooks, who'd chosen her grandson's happiness over her son's greed. About the courage it must have taken to admit her son was wrong, to actively work against him. Evelyn made a mental note to write to her, to send a letter letting her know Thomas was doing well, that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. "Mama," Thomas's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Pa says we can ride out to check the north fence. Want to come?" Evelyn looked at her son's eager face, at Caleb standing behind him with a question in his eyes, and felt her heart swell. "I'd love to." They rode out together, the three of them on horseback, with Thomas chattering about everything he saw. Caleb rode beside Evelyn, and every so often their legs would brush, their eyes would meet, and they'd share a smile that held years of conversation. This was family, Evelyn thought. Not the one she'd been born into or even the one she'd created with her first husband, but the one she'd built from desperation and necessity and unexpected love. Imperfect, unconventional, but wholly theirs. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with snow and wind that turned the prairie white. Evelyn had worried about the isolation, about being snowed in for weeks at a time, but instead she found she loved it. The three of them huddled inside while storms raged outside, playing cards and reading by lamplight and telling stories. It was during one of those long winter evenings, with Thomas asleep upstairs and a fire crackling in the hearth, that Caleb pulled Evelyn into his lap. "I have something to tell you," he said. Evelyn's heart jumped. "What?" "I've been thinking about the future, about this ranch." He paused. "When I married you, I said Thomas would be my heir, that he'd inherit all this when I'm gone." "I remember." "Well, I've been to see a lawyer, had the papers drawn up proper. Everything's in writing now, the ranch, the cattle, everything. It all goes to Thomas when the time comes." Caleb's hand settled on her waist. "But there's more. I've also set aside a portion for you, separate from the ranch. Money and property that's yours alone, that no one can take from you. If something happens to me, you'll be provided for." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "Caleb, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. You came to me with nothing because you'd lost everything trying to protect your son. I'm making sure that never happens again. No matter what, you'll always have security. You'll always be able to stand on your own." "I don't want to stand on my own. I want to stand with you. And you will, for as long as we both live. But I need to know you're protected. Can you understand that?" Evelyn cupped his face in her hands. "I understand. And thank you. For thinking of us. For caring enough to make sure we're safe." "You're my family," Caleb said simply. "Of course I care." She kissed him then, slow and deep, pouring everything she felt into it. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb's eyes were dark with desire. "Thomas is asleep," he murmured. "He is. And it's early yet." "It is." Caleb stood, lifting her with him. "Then let's go to bed." They made love slowly that night, taking their time, relearning each other with hands and mouths and whispered words. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Evelyn felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm happy, really, truly happy, and I keep waiting for something to ruin it." "Nothing's going to ruin it. You can't promise that." "Maybe not. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together." He pulled her closer. "That's what family does." Evelyn pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I love you. I love you too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the wind howling outside but warmth surrounding them. Spring came with a rush of green and new life. The cattle had calved successfully through the winter, and Thomas was beside himself with excitement over the new foals in the barn. Evelyn spent her days planting a garden that was 3 times the size of last year's, already planning what she'd preserve for next winter. It was during one of those long spring days, with the sun warm on her shoulders and dirt under her fingernails, that Evelyn realized she'd missed her monthly courses. Once could be stress or chance. Twice was unusual. 3 times was something else entirely. She didn't say anything at first, afraid to hope, but when another week passed and she woke feeling queasy, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization was overwhelming. Joy and fear and wonder all tangled together. She'd been pregnant before, had carried Thomas and given birth in a comfortable home with her first husband by her side. But this felt different. This child would be born into a family that had been forged through hardship, a family that chose each other every single day. This child would belong to both of them. She told Caleb that evening after Thomas had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch again, their favorite place to talk, and Evelyn's hands were shaking as she took his. "I need to tell you something," she began. Caleb immediately looked concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually, more right than I could have imagined." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." Caleb went absolutely still. His eyes widened and she saw something flash across his face. Shock, fear, hope, all in rapid succession. "You're sure?" His voice was barely a whisper. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I'm sure." Caleb stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch and back. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Was he angry? Afraid? She couldn't read his expression. "Caleb, say something, please." He turned to her, and she saw tears streaming down his face. "I never thought, after Elizabeth, after the baby, I never thought I'd get another chance at this." Evelyn stood and went to him, taking his face in her hands. "You're getting that chance now. We're getting it together." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you like I lost her?" "You won't. I'm strong, Caleb, and we'll get the doctor involved early, make sure everything's done right. We'll be careful." "What if I'm not a good father? What if—" "You're already a good father. Thomas adores you. This baby will too." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Our baby," Evelyn confirmed. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, letting the reality of it sink in. A new life, created from their love, growing inside her. It felt like a miracle. The months that followed were a blur of preparation and anticipation. Caleb was hovering and overprotective, barely letting Evelyn lift anything heavier than a teacup. She found it both endearing and exasperating, but she understood where it came from. He was terrified of losing her, of losing the baby, of history repeating itself. Thomas was thrilled about becoming a big brother. He helped Caleb build a cradle in the barn, carefully sanding the wood smooth so there wouldn't be any splinters. He talked to Evelyn's growing belly, telling the baby about the horses and the ranch, and all the things they'd do together. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" Thomas asked one afternoon while they were shelling peas. "I don't know, sweetheart. What do you hope for?" Thomas considered this seriously. "A sister, I think. I already know how to be a boy, but I don't know anything about sisters. It would be an adventure." Evelyn laughed and kissed the top of his head. "Either way, you'll be a wonderful big brother." As summer turned to autumn again, marking a full year since they'd arrived at the ranch, Evelyn's belly swelled large and round. She moved more slowly now, her back aching and her ankles swelling, but she'd never felt more content. Caleb doted on her constantly, bringing her tea and pillows and rubbing her feet in the evenings while Thomas read aloud from his school books. "We're a real family now, aren't we, Mama?" Thomas said one night, looking up from his book. "We've always been a real family, baby." "I know, but now we're going to be even more real, with the baby and everything." He grinned. "Pa says the baby's going to need all of us to help take care of it. Says raising children takes a whole family." Evelyn looked at Caleb, who was watching them with soft eyes. "Your pa's right. It does take a whole family. Good thing we have one." The baby came on a cold November night during the first snowfall of the season. Evelyn's labor started in the afternoon, and Caleb sent Thomas to fetch the doctor while he stayed with her, his face pale but determined. "I'm scared," he admitted, holding her hand as another contraction gripped her. "I know, but I'm going to be fine. We're both going to be fine. Promise me." "I promise." The doctor arrived just as the sun was setting, and Thomas was sent to stay with Sarah Brennan for the night. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Evelyn saw the fear in Caleb's eyes, the memories of his first wife's death haunting him. But she kept her promise. She fought through every contraction, every wave of pain, and in the early hours of the morning, as snow fell softly outside, their daughter was born. The baby came into the world wailing, pink and perfect, and utterly furious about being evicted from her warm cocoon. The doctor placed her on Evelyn's chest, and Evelyn looked down at the tiny face scrunched up in indignation. "A girl," she whispered. "We have a daughter." Caleb was sitting beside the bed, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. "She's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe—" His voice broke. The doctor cleaned up efficiently, checking both mother and baby thoroughly. "Everyone's healthy," he announced. "Strong heartbeat on the little one, and Mrs. Hart came through beautifully. You've got yourselves a fine daughter." After the doctor left, Caleb climbed onto the bed beside Evelyn, careful not to jostle her. Together they looked down at their daughter, who had stopped crying and was now blinking up at them with dark blue eyes. "What should we name her?" Evelyn asked. Caleb touched one tiny fist with his finger, and the baby immediately gripped it. "Elizabeth," he said softly. "After my first wife. If that's all right with you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "It's more than all right. It's perfect. Elizabeth Hart." "Elizabeth Rose Hart," Caleb amended. "After both of them. After everything that's brought us here." They brought Thomas home the next morning to meet his sister. He approached the bed cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder. "She's so small," he whispered. "You were this small once, too," Evelyn said. "Want to hold her?" Thomas nodded eagerly. Caleb helped him sit in the rocking chair and carefully placed Elizabeth in his arms, showing him how to support her head. Thomas looked down at his baby sister with pure adoration. "Hi, Elizabeth. I'm your big brother, Thomas. I'm going to teach you everything. How to ride horses and feed chickens and find the best rocks by the creek." He looked up at Evelyn and Caleb with shining eyes. "She's the best thing ever." Caleb's hand found Evelyn's, squeezing tight. "She is. You both are." The first year of Elizabeth's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tiny milestones. She was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and she had both Caleb and Thomas wrapped around her tiny finger from day one. Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, always the first to notice when she was fussing, always wanting to help. Caleb was a different man than the one Evelyn had met 2 years ago. The hardness had melted away entirely, replaced by a gentleness she never would have believed possible. He held Elizabeth like she was made of glass, sang to her in the evenings, and spent hours just watching her sleep with wonder in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," he told Evelyn one night. They were in bed, Elizabeth asleep in her cradle beside them. A family, children, someone to love who loves me back. After Elizabeth died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now? Now I wake up every morning and can't believe how lucky I am. He rolled to face her, his hand settling on her waist. "You gave me everything, Evelyn. You gave me a son and a daughter and a reason to live. How do I ever thank you for that?" "You already have. Every day. Just by being you." As Evelyn kissed him softly. "We saved each other, Caleb. That's what we did." As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Caleb expanded the herd, built new corrals, and hired help during the busy seasons. Thomas, now 9 years old, worked alongside the ranch hands like he'd been born to it. And Evelyn found herself not just managing a household, but actively participating in ranch decisions, her opinions valued and respected. They were partners in every sense of the word. One spring afternoon, nearly 3 years after she'd first collapsed at Caleb's gate, Evelyn stood on the porch watching her family. Thomas was in the corral teaching Elizabeth how to feed carrots to the gentlest horse while Caleb supervised, ready to catch his daughter if she wobbled. Elizabeth's delighted laughter carried across the yard, and Thomas's patient explanations made Evelyn's heart swell. Sarah Brennan rode up, dismounting with a grin. "Still staring at that handsome husband of yours?" "Every chance I get," Evelyn admitted. "As you should. That man worships the ground you walk on." Sarah tied her horse and climbed the porch steps. "I actually came to tell you something. Got a letter from a friend back east. She mentioned that Marcus Brooks tried to come back to town last month. Evelyn's stomach clenched. And? And his mother shut him down before he even got off the train, told him in no uncertain terms that if he showed his face in this territory again, she'd disinherit him completely. He got right back on that train and left. Sarah's smile was satisfied. That woman doesn't mess around. No, she doesn't. Evelyn thought of Catherine Brooks, who she'd been corresponding with regularly. The older woman received letters about her grandson's progress, pictures Thomas drew, updates on Elizabeth. It was a tentative relationship, but a real one. I'm glad she's keeping her word. We all are. You and Caleb have built something good here. You deserve to enjoy it without that vulture circling. After Sarah left, Evelyn walked down to the corral. Elizabeth saw her coming and squealed, reaching out with chubby arms. Evelyn scooped her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. Mama, did you see? Lizzie fed the horse all by herself. Thomas was beaming with pride. I did see. You're an excellent teacher. Caleb came up behind Evelyn, wrapping his arms around both her and Elizabeth. Beautiful day. Perfect day, Evelyn agreed. They stood there together, the four of them, surrounded by the land they'd worked and the life they'd built. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. The garden Evelyn had planted was already showing green shoots. The house behind them was warm and welcoming, filled with laughter and love. This was everything Evelyn had never dared to dream of during those desperate days, walking through the prairie with Thomas burning in her arms. This was home. This was family. This was love that had been earned through hardship and sacrifice, and the simple choice to keep showing up for each other, day after day. What are you thinking? Caleb asked softly. Evelyn looked up at him, at this man who'd been a stranger and become her everything. I'm thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is from that day I showed up at your gate. Best day of my life, Caleb said, even if I didn't know it at the time. Mine too. Thomas tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. Mama, can we have a picnic dinner tonight, out by the creek? I think that's a wonderful idea. They spent the evening by the water eating Evelyn's fried chicken and fresh bread while Elizabeth toddled around collecting rocks, and Thomas told elaborate stories about his adventures with the cattle. Caleb sat with his arm around Evelyn's shoulders, and every so often he'd lean down to kiss her temple or whisper something that made her laugh. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas looked up from his rock collection. Pa, do you ever think about what would have happened if Mama and I hadn't come to your ranch? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. I think I'd probably still be alone, just going through the motions of living without really being alive. And we'd probably be... Thomas stopped, the unspoken ending heavy in the air. But that didn't happen, Evelyn said firmly. We found each other. We built this family together, and that's what matters. Will we always be together? Thomas asked. There was a vulnerability in his voice that made Evelyn's heart ache. Always, Caleb promised. You're my son. Elizabeth's your sister. Your mama's my wife. Nothing's going to change that. Even when I'm grown up? Even then. Family doesn't stop being family just because you get older. This ranch will be yours someday, yours and Elizabeth's. And hopefully, you'll raise your own children here. Keep the family going. Thomas smiled, satisfied. He went back to his rocks, and Elizabeth crawled into Caleb's lap, her eyes drooping with sleep. Evelyn looked at her family, her son, her daughter, her husband, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. They'd started as three broken people brought together by desperation and necessity. They'd become something far greater than the sum of their parts. A family. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth every struggle. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn and Caleb stood on the porch one more time, looking out at the land that had become their home. Do you ever regret it? Evelyn asked. Marrying me that day? Taking us on? Caleb turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Not for one single second. You and Thomas and Elizabeth, you're the best things that ever happened to me. You saved my life, Evelyn. Gave me a reason to live again. You saved mine too. You gave us a home when we had nothing. You fought for us when no one else would. You loved us when we needed it most. I'll keep loving you every day for the rest of my life. Evelyn rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. And I'll keep loving you right back. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, two people who'd been broken and lost and desperate, finding wholeness in each other's arms. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its details but secure in its foundation. They had each other. They had their children. They had this ranch and this life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. And that was more than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Thomas was grown and bringing his own wife to the ranch, when Elizabeth was learning to ride and already showing signs of her father's quiet strength, when Evelyn's hair had started to silver and Caleb's beard had gone completely gray, they would sometimes sit on that same porch and remember. Remember the day a desperate woman collapsed at a gate with her dying son in her arms. Remember the decision to help, to marry, to fight. Remember the moment when obligation transformed into love, and a family of strangers became something real and permanent. Best decision I ever made, Caleb would say, pulling Evelyn close. Mine too, she would agree. And in the house behind them, filled with children and grandchildren and the echoes of laughter, the life they'd built together would continue on, a testament to the power of choosing love, choosing family, choosing to keep showing up even when the odds seemed impossible. They had started with nothing but each other. They had built everything that mattered, and that was the truest kind of happily ever after there could be.